you grow up with a NES, PlayStation, Star Wars, cartoons, and 80s TV? Do you like to think who would win in a fight between Batman and the Master Chief? Comics, games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of geeks. Games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of This Week in Geek. This Week in Geek.
It's time for another TurdOrTreasure roundup show. We've had a lot of reviews come in, and it's finally getting them out now, which is great, because we were trying to find places to slot them in. But as you know, we only have 3 slots per regular show. We are going to be launching a comic book based show and maybe some others in the future, so we'll have more room to put regular reviews in weekly. We'll see how that goes later. So this is going to be a pretty rapid fire show where we're going to have each of the reviews that we had produced put in here, and at the end, I'll sort of come back and just sort of say where we're going this week, and and see where we're going from here on, because we've got a lot of interesting things in the works coming up, and I'll be back, I guess, after all the reviews. So without further ado, let's go. Ubisoft sent over Warlords of New York, which is the expansion DLC for The Division 2, and I had a chance to catch up to speed. I had to log in, get sort of up to speed and move on. It's a brand new city. It's brand new tweaks. It's actually been a while since we played and reviewed the initial Division 2 release, and we found it, to be honest, lacking compared to the original Division release a few years ago. They've largely, from what I've seen now, gone in, tweaked things, fixed bugs. It's more enjoyable, actually, than when we first initially played it, which is, I guess, a sign of the times about how these living games can evolve as they go. So if you were somebody maybe sort of, I guess, on the fence about it before, or didn't enjoy the initial playthrough, as we had some issues that we didn't care for, a lot of that seems to have been cleared up, and this new expansion is actually pretty good. I won't go into details of the story or anything, but it is a lot more solid in gameplay than it was previously, and it might be a good time to jump into it. This is just a quick overview of my thoughts on it. They've done a lot of tweaks, there's a lot more balance, I think, now to the gameplay, as well as the way the loot system works. It seems to be a little more fair, if that makes any sense. And it is always nice having a different locale than what you're used to in the game. I wasn't as big of a fan of the initial map and everything of the Division 2, and this seems to be, I guess, a little more logically put together in my mind. I'm enjoying it. There's a lot of bang for your buck and value in the game now, as far as if you get this with the expansion, there's a lot to do here, and I think it's probably worth Birdman and I giving it another go playing multiplayer together, because we don't want to let the initial play that we had taint us, especially when so much has been changed and upgraded and just better overall in the game. So if you're somebody who had the initial release of the game and sort of have lapsed and not playing anymore, is it worth picking up the expansion for Warlords of New York? Probably. If you were a fan, especially of the first game, it's a little closer to that. And if you're somebody who's new to it, is it worth picking up? Watch a video or two, see if the gameplay is going to be for you. But I think, if you're even remotely interested in the title, it's probably a better time now to jump in than it was, at launch. Just a quick one here from NISAmerica. We were sent over a copy of Kemono Heroes on the Nintendo Switch, and it's sort of a retro action platformery, retro pixel art inspired game. And the basic premise of it is that when the moon god turns the inhabitants of the forest to stone, 4 animal ninja masters, they end up fighting their way to Mount Fuji to break the spell. There's, arsenal of moves. There's a whole bunch of power-ups and things that are throwable. They're based on some really cute different characters. So it's sort of hard to sort of pinpoint what style this is. It's a little bit Ninja Gaiden, a little bit Mario platformery, a little bit anthropomorphic animal style of 90s game, if that makes any sense. It's sort of like when you saw the games coming out on the 16-bit console generation, you're like, what would the next gen look like before we knew everything was moving 3D? It's like, what would 32-bit games in that style look like? This is sort of it. It's pretty fun. It's not as difficult as I thought it was going to be, in that I was able to breeze through it. I'm usually not that great when it comes to like a Ninja Gaiden or action platformy type thing. I usually have to take a few tries. But honestly, I was into it in about 5 minutes. I was able to catch on and be able to do pretty much anything. The options of the characters you can play are a fox, I guess a hamster, a monkey, and then what's the fun one there? Like a dog sort of thing. It's probably a Japanese creature that we don't have. But it is up to 4 players, which is pretty cool, and it's overall a pretty solid title, and it's available digitally. It's pretty cheap. It's not going to be your expensive full release title, but it's something that I think is going to fly under the radar and people are going to miss. So check out a video if you're unsure for Kemono Heroes. But it was something I liked to play. I ended up playing it a few times when I was taking city transit here and there, and it was easy to pick up and play and just pause the game and come back to, and I didn't have to worry about it. So I'm liking that NISAmerica is going with some of these smaller titles as well now, because usually they are in the mid-range to higher-end releases, and it's always good to pick up a good, indie-feeling title like this.
Basically, using geeks.
Leave me alone, geek boy.
Holy shit, you geeks are badass.
The Langrisser series has sort of had a weird Western release history. You had, like the first one came out initially, I believe you could get it on the Genesis. Was it under the was it Warsong? Or no, there were a few titles released on the system where they would take like the Japanese version and then change the name and release it here. But I know that it had a spotty release where there was like a PSP game that came out. It might have been the 5th game in the series. There was maybe a release in between there somewhere, but it sort of was hit or miss when it came to localization and getting released outside of Japan. They are, tactical strategy RPGs, similar in style, although a little more difficult than, in my personal experience, the Fire Emblem series and the Shining Force series. Sort of somewhere in there is a little more of a hardcore strategy RPG. It's been long running for quite some time. We're talking 25 years or so, and we're getting finally new remastered copies. NISAmerica has put out and sent over a copy of the Langrisser 1 and 2 remastered HD package, where it's 2 games on one release. And it comes with Langrisser 1, and the basic premise of the story here is the forces of darkness are descending upon the kingdom of Valdia. You take up the sword as the prince, and you sort of find out what's been going on and what happened. Langrisser 2 is the forces of darkness. They're coming back. It's standard fantasy fare. But what they're doing with this is they've released the game in full high def with brand new visuals, but you can also toggle the original visuals on and off, whenever you feel like it, which is really cool because you can look back at like the 16-bit era graphics, or you can switch it right up for HD, sprites, which is pretty neat. The music's been, overhauled. There's a new localization that I found no grammatical errors or anything that was strange. It seems it was very, whoever translated this has a really good flow for the language, which is really good. Which sometimes it can be either stilted or they can localize it too much where it no longer makes sense in the context of where it came from. This is sort of a middle ground that works just pretty well. It's a long game because it's 2 games that would normally take hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. So it took me quite a long time to beat, but because of the nature of it being a strategy game where you can beat a scenario save, you can do it in bite-sized 1-hour chunks if you choose to, and overall I would say it's probably the best representation outside of the we're talking like high tier Fire Emblem that you have on the Switch now, and this is available on the Switch and PS4. I have a PS4 copy. I feel like PS4 has been lacking a lot of good strategy RPGs, so this is a welcome addition. It plays, from what I can tell, identical on multiple platforms because of the art style. It's not going to have any slowdowns or anything. It looks great on my TV, and I had a pretty good time just going through it bit by bit, and it's really good that they're including 2 games in here because it just adds value to it. Overall, if you like strategy RPGs, you're going to like Langrisser 1 and 2. It is, not for the faint of heart. This is not like baby's first strategy RPG, but at the same time, it's not as punishing as it would have been on the original platform. Just a quick one here. Our friends at Koei-Tecmo sent over a review copy of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 14. Now, I don't need to go into too much of the history of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms or the fact that the series has gone on for 14 releases, but it is basically a classical retelling of the historical Chinese stories about how they basically united China years ago. It's been done a million times before, but this is the granddaddy of the simulators of that. It's basically civilization, but Chinese history, and that's the best way to put it. There are some scenarios in this that are made up or what if scenarios. What if this had happened, and you can control that, but it's basically that, and you don't need to go into more details on that because it's been covered bazillion times in every other release of that time period. It's done on the old Destiny of an Emperor, that franchise on the original Nintendo that was the traditional JRPG. It's been told in Dynasty Warriors. That's the storyline that you follow with that. So if you play Dynasty Warriors, the story. And Romance of the Three Kingdoms is the true strategy civilization style game in the franchise. Now, each version usually adds a little bit here and there. I haven't played in probably 10 versions or so. So getting to play this was pretty good. It's a much slower pace than other style of games, in this not genre, but in the history of this. Usually you play their action based, or you play them on like Dynasty Warriors and that sort of thing. But this is a more methodical, let's slowly take things over. Who do we talk to? Who do you negotiate with? Who do you conquer? Blah, blah, blah. And it's pretty fun, getting through each scenario. The graphics are nothing to write home about, but most civilization strategy simulators are not really overly graphically enhanced, but it is sort of the logical step up from the previous iterations of this. So if you've liked them before, you're probably going to like it here. The translation is pretty top notch. It's not voice acted in English or anything, but you don't need it for this because it's a text heavy reading game. It is, if you're somebody who is interested in the history of China, it's probably one to watch because they will show you actually what happened, and each scenario will tell you, like, this is a real event that happened, this is a fake event, or this is an extrapolation, so you can know what's real and what's fake, which is pretty cool. So I do like that they've kept this franchise alive in the West, and they've actually gone and made sure that it's got a good localization, so there's no grammatical errors or weird things that don't fit or make sense. It's pretty solid. I think this is a very niche title, so it's not going to hit the mainstream. But if you are a fan of Civilization, it might be one to check out.
This is a fair request, and I promise I will not judge any person only as a teenager, and that this is no more right than saying all teenagers are drunken dope addicts or glue sniffers.
The next two releases in the Sega Ages line are here. It's Puyo Puyo 2 and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So I'm going to briefly skim over Sonic the Hedgehog 2 because everybody's played it, everybody knows it's been released a bazillion times. And just say that it is probably the best emulated version of it because they've gone and tweaked what they can here and there. There's a level select. There's a whole bunch of other little goodies you can get by getting scores up to a certain point. You can unlock little things here and there. And it scales perfectly well from the small screen to the big screen, and it's the Sonic 2 you know and love. So there's nothing really to say more about that other than M2 did a fantastic job porting it to the Switch. But the other release is Puyo Puyo 2, which I don't remember ever playing a version of. We've seen like Puyo Puyo releases now on the Switch where they've done like full remasters, and they've done where it's gone like into full HD and everything. This is the arcade game, and it plays differently. There are different difficulty settings you can set, which are really helpful because without doing that, it's difficult on the on the regular arcade setting. But I went through and was able to play through on like the easiest setting. It took about an hour and a half to beat because you do still die a couple times. There's occasionally you'll find a boss that's a lot harder. And then, I moved up the difficulty to normal, and there seems to be a good sweet spot in just somewhere in between the easiest and normal setting for me as far as enjoyability goes. But they've done a pretty good job of porting it. The audio sounds great. It's the Puyo Puyo puzzle game that you sort of know and love. And there's nothing really much more to say about it other than it's just a really solid port. Everything that M2's been putting out on the Sega Ages line is, I'd say worth it. I'm going to imagine that the Sonic 2 version is going to download a lot more on people's consoles than Puyo Puyo, but I do think you should give Puyo Puyo a try because these guys are basically, they're releasing them at about $7, $8 a piece, depending on your region that you're in. And at this point, I'm getting to the point now where I'm not finding the same value in like retro collecting, physical hardware. These versions of these games, especially like Sonic 2, it's better than the original because you can do the scan lines, you can make it look like the original, and it plays like the original. No glitches, no hiccups, no input lags, anything like that. At this point, it's almost more fun to see these games, ported and handled the way they're handled because back in the day, we used to have bad ports. Companies just didn't give a crap about it. But M2 puts in a lot of effort, and they make these games as buttery smooth as possible. We don't normally do a lot of pure sports titles on This Week in Geek, simply because for the numbered sports titles, it's pretty much the same game every year with slight changes, with the exception of generally in the past we've reviewed a couple versions of MLB The Show, and that's because it's exclusive to one platform, and it sort of has a mixture every year of simulation and arcadey style gameplay, and that's sort of the outlier. Well, we have the opportunity to check out Soccer Tactics and Glory, and I normally, again, I would have been like, nah, but then, when it popped up and I got to read about the title, I was like, wait, turn-based strategy soccer game, or football for our European and outside of North America friends. I went, okay, so what is it? How does that work? Is it like a little bit of RPG elements, a little bit of strategy? And pretty much that's how it plays out. You get to create characters and so on, and there's weather effects on the maps that can affect how the game is played. But essentially, you pick your turn. Like, you have your layout on the field. You pick how you're going to do things with the strategy and tactics, and you watch how it plays out, and the AI does a turn and so on. And it's almost like not quite obviously as in depth as like Civilization, but it's like, what if you mixed a little bit of Civ with a little bit of like XCOM style with a little bit of soccer? And it turns out it's actually kind of fun. It's not, the best graphics in the world. It's not like it's a huge AAA title, but it's completely serviceable, and it's available on pretty much every platform. I had a chance to check it out on Xbox, so I wanted to just see how that would play out on that platform, and it turns out it works well. And from what I can tell, on every other platform, it's about the same. Frame rate isn't obviously going to be an issue because it is a tactical game, and there were no dips or major loading times or anything that I noticed. It seems to be pretty well optimized. It's not your standard. Like, I thought it was going to be just like a coach game or something where you're just sitting there looking at plays and you're like, just do this here, I'm going to manage my team. Now that doesn't interest me at all. I don't know enough about the sports, that kind of thing. But I've played random arcadey style sports titles before, and I usually enjoy them. This was interesting because it was literally a tactical strategy sports title, so it is something to check out. It's not going to be for everybody, obviously, but it's something. And we're always willing to talk about something different on the show, and I found that I'm like, this is a little more maybe up the alley of the people that listen to us and play, and it's something that you might want to check out. Give the trailer a watch. It's you can look it up on YouTube. I'll put a link in the description for where you can find the title, but it was pretty cool. I was genuinely surprised at how much fun I had playing a turn-based strategy soccer game. It's been a little while since we had a couple releases from the MVD Rewind collection to look at, but we now have The Point and Mindgames, and I'll go a little bit into The Point first. It is a British animated feature narrated by Ringo Starr, which is what interested me, but here's sort of the basic premise of it. It's directed by and animated by the Academy Award winner Fred Wolf, who did Free to Be, You and Me, and was also involved with the Flintstones. So what we have here is something extremely British. It is, I'll just read the synopsis for you. Years ago, there was a place called the Land of the Point, because everything in the Land of the Point had won. The barns, the houses, the cars, everything, even the people. Everyone, that is, except Oblio, who was born with round-headed. Since he had no point, he, along with his trusty dog Arrow, was banished to the pointless forest. Join them and see what wonders await as the two intrepid travelers make their way on their amazing song-filled journey of discovery. Music is pretty solid in this. It is very strange, drawn animated. It's almost like water painted and like crayons and just. If you think of weird, strange 60s and 70s British animation, almost like Monty Python-esque, that's sort of what you can expect here. It's framed in 1.37:1. It's in a 16mm element is what they used to remaster it, because they are missing the original 35mm. I don't think it was ever preserved, or they can't find it. But they did find a 16mm print, which surprisingly they did a pretty good job of remastering. It's got a 5.1 surround soundtrack, plus stereo version, which has, is good for the music, even though originally it would have been probably displayed in mono in theaters. There are a whole ton of interviews, some of them new, some of them old in HD, well over, it's got to be a couple hours worth of documentaries on here, which are worth watching because they go into like who Harry Nilsson is, who composed the music, about the director, what is the feature, how did they put it together, the making of, the legacy of it, and it's pretty cool because there's a lot. People forget that Britain had a lot of weird animated releases in the 70s and 60s that people don't really talk about nowadays, but they put a lot of effort into here. There's actually probably 2 times the running time of the movie in just special features alone, which is pretty solid. And overall, I found that it had a charming aspect to it. It is kind of freaky. I don't know if little kids would want to watch it nowadays without their parents, being okay with it. Like, you'd have to watch it first and then decide whether or not it's for kids anymore. But overall, I mean, it was pretty solid. I think it's neat, especially, it's got one of the Beatles doing the narration, which is always great in my book, Mr. Conductor himself. So, moving on, Mindgames. This is the newest release, and I love that they always come with, I'm going to mention because I've mentioned it before, there's always a poster and a slip cover with these releases from the Rewind collection where they make it look like a VHS rental, which is pretty neat. But Mindgames is, from the late 80s. Here's the premise of it. Max Caulfield stars in the psychological thriller from director Bob Yari, who was the producer of the Academy Award-winning Crash. If you remember that big picture from, it's got to be about almost 20 years ago now, about a family's battle for survival against a cruel, scheming stranger. Trapped in an unhappy marriage, Dana Lund and his wife, Rita, try to breathe new life into their relationship by taking a trip through Northern California with their 10-year-old son, Kevin. Along the way, they pick up Eric, an amiable hitchhiker who's a psychology student. But Eric's charm masks the fact that he is psychotic. Sensing Lund's vulnerability, he decides to take control of the family, then destroy it through deceit and emotional manipulation. At first, the Lunds are easy prey until they realize they have become victims via bizarre, scheme, and they're sort of, being terrorized by this guy. They begin to fight back in a desperate attempt to save themselves from Eric's madness and preserve Mindgames. It's pretty solid. It's one that I think I had heard of in the past. It's one of those things where it would have been on VHS a long time ago, and my parents probably watched it. It's a pretty solid release. It's been, remastered. It's in 1.78 to 1 ratio, which is not the original ratio it would have been. It was probably either broadcast in full screen or in traditional widescreen. But I feel this is a happy medium. Nothing is cut off, and everything seems to be fine. It might be open matte. That's how that's probably presented. It's got 2.0 stereo soundtrack, which is PCM audio, so it's lossless completely. Sounds great. There are some new features, which MVD is usually really good at putting out there. There's a making of, which is 108 minutes long. Isn't that crazy how they include a lot? It's a brand new feature length retrospective. It's worth a watch. They spare no expense when they put out these releases, and they range in price, anywhere from $30 or so dollars. If you are a fan of like psychological thrillers, like what's a good example? If you've ever seen Desperate Hours, that is the original one. I think is a little dated now because it's from the 50s, but the one from the late 80s, early 90s, starring Anthony Hopkins and Mickey Rourke, where Mickey Rourke is a criminal who basically terrorizes a family in their own home. Similar idea, very well executed, and I would say worth a watch for sure. I'm a fan of all these releases from MVD because they put so much quality into it, especially in all the special features. So Mindgames is worth watching. The point is worth it if you are a big fan of like the animation, or you want, I don't know, if you're a big Beatles fan maybe, but it's definitely the harder watch of the two. And I wouldn't recommend it for kids anymore because it was too freaky. Too many British things are freaky for kids. But overall, I'm pretty happy with both of them. So Mindgames and The Point are out now from MVD. Check them out. Easiest way to probably pick them up is on Amazon.
Do you have any hobbies?
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
Hold that thought. It's crapper time.
Our friends at VVS Films sent over a couple of their new releases, The Courier and Trauma Center. Trauma Center stars Bruce Willis. I'll go into that one first here. He plays a cop trying to protect a woman from a couple killers who want her because she has a bullet in her leg, which will then match up with the murders of so-and-so. And, without spoiling what happens, she's basically the physical piece of evidence that they need. They want to just kill her and remove the bullet. And Bruce Willis has to, sort of hide her in a trauma center, obviously. It's a fairly bare-bones release, but the visual quality is pretty good. It's one of Bruce Willis's better movies of the last few years because he's really hit or miss. He has some theatrical features and then he has some direct-to-video, and this is one of his better performances. He's sort of like Nick Cage now, where everything he puts out is pretty solid overall for a watch, but is it something that you want to buy or collect? It's all going to depend on if you are a collector of Bruce Willis films. Overall, it's good. It's not one of his top-tier ones, but it's definitely enjoyable and, worth it on like a weekend watch with the family. Now, as far as the Courier is concerned, I found that one to be a better movie. It has Olga Kurylenko in it, who you'd know from Quantum of Solace, Gary Oldman, and Dermot Mulroney's in it. And it's probably the better of the two movies if you were comparing them, but I still enjoyed both, actually. But this is about a motorcycle courier played by Olga, must fight off a sadistic crime boss played by Gary Oldman with an eye patch, which is fantastic, in order to protect one witness that can bring him down. Standard fare. There's an audio commentary as the lone special feature, but the commentary gave a little more insight into how the picture's made, but it wasn't anything super, miraculous or enlightening. But overall, it's nice to have that in here. It's a pretty solid, action thriller movie. Feels like a 90s movie, which I'm happy with. So I had a pretty good time watching both. They're both worth it. They retail anywhere from $15 to $20, depending on what store you're getting them from. They're both pretty good. Check out a trailer for each of them on YouTube if you're on the fence. But if you're a collector, of action thrillers, both of these films, you can't go wrong with them. Our friends at PQube send over a couple of their new releases, which are pretty hard to pronounce the names for, but I'll start with the easier one, Ciel Fledge, a daughter-raising simulator. It is sort of like a hybrid of like old PC games like Princess Maker, that franchise out of Japan, and with a little bit of like Civ, I guess, if that makes any sense. You are basically in charge of raising this girl into adulthood in a post-apocalyptic future world. You're in a floating city, and you can determine, everything about how you train her, what kind of person she's going to be based on like a city map that you can go through and do missions and training and interactions with people, and sort of determine, how you're going to focus this building and molding this person into being, an adult. And it's very, it's in depth, but it's still easy enough that anybody can pick up and play. And it's got, tactical aspects to it, RPG aspects. It's sort of a hodgepodge of everything. It's actually pretty entertaining. The only downside to it is the graphics are pretty amateurish, and they could be off-putting to some people in that it just looks kind of cheap, if that, for lack of a better word, which, I hate saying because it's pretty solid gameplay and a solid premise, and it functions very well. It just looks like, I don't know, I'm not a fan of the art style, but that's just me because, it's subjective. The actual gameplay makes up for it in my mind, though, and I had a pretty good time playing through it. It's available on Steam and the Nintendo Switch. It's worth checking out, like a trailer for it if you want. If you're on the fence, you don't know about it, just give it a watch and see if it's going to be something for you. Now, on to the harder to pronounce game. There is Under Night in Birth EXE late bracket CI-R bracket. Okay. So it's another one of those anime-style fighting games. And I'm not... Let me just try. Under Night in Birth, I laughed hard. I have no idea how to pronounce that. But whatever. Is the gameplay any good? Because let's just ignore storyline because it's a fighting game. It is a solid fighter. Really, really easy to pick up and play. One of those ones like easy to pick up and play, easy to win when you got it set to the lower settings. And then you can amp up the difficulty, and it's got a very deep counter and bonus fighting system where you can build up meters and do special moves, and it's basically your standard 2D beautiful fighting game that works buttery smooth. It's available on the Switch and the PS4, and it's always nice when you get to pick up and play one of these that are a little different. There's a bit of load time I noticed, but that's something that can easily be patched in and out because it's it's loading from a hard drive. It shouldn't have to have 10 seconds between fights, but I don't know how it's buffering or whatever. It's something that I noticed that feels a little bit like something you would have experienced on the last generation versus what you should be experiencing now. But I played it enough that as I was playing more and more, it seemed the load time went down. So it might be something where it's buffering a certain amount of data into the cache, and once it's in the system cache, it can just load it a lot faster. But I noticed the first couple fights just seemed to take a little longer to load, so whatever. But that just might be an anomaly that I experienced. But overall, I had a fun time. It's one of those pick-up-and-play fighting games. I'm not going to talk about the story because they never matter in these games. It's about the solid gameplay, and it is quite good. And it's one of those iterations where every couple of years there's a new version of this title or an expanded version, and they add a character or two, tweak things here and there. But this is the first time I've played anything in the Under Night in Birth, a franchise. Is it a franchise if it's the same game over and over again with new versions? You know what I'm saying? It's like how there's like 3 or 4 versions of Street Fighter that come out for the same game. And this is the latest and greatest, and it's pretty good. Yakuza 0 from Sega is now out on the Xbox platform. And this is actually the first time I've had a chance to check it out. I've had the remakes like Kiwami 1 and 2, 3 through 5 I reviewed just a little while ago. I haven't played 6. But now I've played the Yakuza 0, the prequel, and I'm sort of getting a picture of the whole story. It's funny, I've played all the other games on the PlayStation, but this is the first one on Xbox. And playing it on the Xbox One X is pretty enlightening. The graphics are really good. Like, this is obviously a port that was made for PC, and it works flawlessly on the Xbox One X because it's optimized for it. Graphically, it's great. It is, not the newest title in the franchise, so it's not have the most enhanced graphics, but it's pretty solid. Story-wise, it is, diving into the seedy underbelly of the past, of the games, because it all takes place, before the first game. It is one that you don't necessarily want to play before you played at least the first title. It's weird, even though it's 0, it's it comes before the first one. You get more of an appreciation if you played the first couple games in the series, and then come and play this. But it's available on Xbox One and PC. Now the highlight of these, because if you know the Yakuza games, you know that they're fun, fighting, action with a bit of world building, and then they usually have like some sort of arcade or mini games involved. And there's a fair amount in this. There's mini games you can collect and play: Fantasy Zone, Outrun, Space Harrier, Super Hang-On, and UFO Catcher. There's the other mini games you can do in here to either get money, respect, or just for fun. There's a battling center, bowling, which is great, casino games, which are pretty standard for most of these style games. So you can play, blackjack, poker, roulette, baccarat. There's a cat cafe, which is I wanted to spend all my entire time there in this game. Darts, disco, dancing, which is great. Fishing, different traditional Japanese gambling, karaoke, mahjong, pocket circuit racing, pool, shogi, and then there's a telephone club. which is, it's great sort of seeing this flash in the past of, what was popular at the time when this is set. But the as far as graphics go, this is probably the best it's ever looked. It's better than it would have looked even on the PlayStation because 1X has more power. I experienced basically no load times. Once the game is up and running, it seemed buttery smooth. The fidelity is great. The audio is fantastic. The controls are tight and responsive. There is little to no lag at all. And if you've liked the Yakuza titles, or you say you wanted to play them but you didn't have the opportunity because you didn't have a PlayStation, well, if you got a PC or an Xbox, this is the chance to sort of jump in. I would again suggest you could play it just without playing the other games, and it would be perfectly fine. But you get a little more out of it if you've played the first one at least. So something to consider. But it's highly recommended.
Those magnificent bastards. Color me kooky, but something very odd is going on around here.
You're not allowed to talk anymore.
And that's going to do it for this week's show. I know it's a lot in there, but we've had a lot to catch up on, and it was nice to have them in there because there's a lot of really good things that have come out, and they sort of came out in a compressed time right around each other. Now, as far as what's going on with the site, we've got a new episode of Future Imperfect, I believe, coming out this week with Steve from GCRN, where we discuss the, next 3 episodes that have aired, 4, 5, and 6 of, at that point, at least 4, 5, and 6 of the card. We've got, I believe there's more Nerd to the Third coming out. We are working on creating a couple new shows this year, which we've sort of hinted at, but the idea is we want to do like a B-movie watch-along review show of like the canon films and some of the direct-to-video 90s movies, as well as we're working on probably what's going to be a monthly or maybe every other week, or at least once a month comic book show that we're working on. And we're just sort of getting that to come together now. We are having work done on the website finally, so we are going to have a refresh of that, some new branding and all that. It'd be nice. It's nice for a refresh because everything here has sort of had little patches here and there, and it's been sort of the same for the better part of almost 10 years now. So it's nice, or actually no, that's incorrect. Better part of 6 years. So it's nice to actually have an upgrade to all that. And again, we've got more stuff coming. As far as reviews go, I know Birdman's working on a few. I am basically cleared up my slate, except there should be a package coming. We're going to be covering some new releases from La La Land Records. And we've also got, at least my part, I will be burying myself knee-deep in Persona 5 Royal. So that's what I'm starting pretty much right after this recording comes out. So that's going to do it for this week. When are we going to be back? It all depends on when we have more reviews than we can cover on the main programs. So I guess I'll talk to everybody later.
Well, that's our show.
All right, here's the deal. Every time you watch my show, I will send you $40.
Checks will not be honored.
You've been listening to This Week in Geek, your source for guaranteed nonsense or your money back. Tune in next week for more info on the most important things you didn't need to know. Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net and subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or any podcatcher. If you'd like to comment on this episode, head over to this episode's post at thisweekingeek.net and leave a comment through Facebook Connect. Follow us on Twitter at thisweekingeek.net and follow our Instagram at twig_official_podcast. Social media not your thing? Send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. We'll see you next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
Just when you think this show is terrible, something wonderful happens.
What?
It ends.
I have to go. Somewhere there is a crime happening.
Get your lazy behind out here and put that trunk up in the back.
Oh, no, we've got it.
It's very heavy. She don't mind. She's short and skinny, but she's strong. Her first baby come out sideways. She didn't scream or nothing.
Isn't that something? You're a real trooper.